Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We were talking before we got on stage about how there's a certain group of people that like to talk about buildings, and so we feel like this is a good close-knit family to be able to do that. So we appreciate all of you coming out today and all of you being able to be here for this conversation. I'm very excited to talk about it today. I'm very excited to introduce you to these amazing experts that we're gonna be able to engage with over the course of the next 50 to 60 minutes. My name is Mark Chambers, so good morning to all of you. I know some of you, like many of you, have known the various hats that I've worn over time, whether it's on the policy spectrum from being the Chief Sustainability Officer of New York City, or my time in the White House on the Biden climate team focused on building emissions. You also might know that building performance standards are my love language, so that's also something that I'm very proud of and consistently try to advocate for. But what we're here today to talk about is the future and looking forward, and how are we kind of thinking is being as intentional as we can about the work we're doing in the built environment to make sure we are unlocking the potential of the future. And a lot of that has to do with really appreciating the value add of buildings. You know, buildings are where we spend 90% of our time. It's where we go to work. It's where we go to conferences. It's where we go to school. It's where we grab coffee with friends. Buildings are how we create the enclosure for the lives that we're living, and they also allow for us to be able to unlock our ambition. So I think that a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how are we doing that? What are the strategies that we are implementing? How are we being as thoughtful as possible around the built environment so that it can help us, be the best versions of ourselves? And as such, I brought this amazing panel together to be able to talk to all of you about it. And we're covering the spectrum of the work that's necessary to be able to future-proof the buildings that support us. So whether it's from the world of finance or design and construction or data, all of those are key components to how we create the built environment that we want and the one that we need to be responsive to this very changing environment that we're involved in. So. Moments from now, you're going to meet this amazing panel. You're going to meet Kim, Victoria, Elena, and James. And I thought that for an introduction, you guys can see their bios in the app, but let's get a vibe check just to see how people are actually feeling about the built environment, and because there's a lot going on. We're not going to pretend like it's not. And so I would love to just get a temperature vibe check from all of you, kind of a couple quick words about how you're feeling, just generally. One word maybe would be good. And then on top of that, you can just give a little explanation as to why that's how you feel. So we'll go down the line. We'll start with Kim, and then we'll dive in.
Thanks, Mark. So you don't want us to introduce ourselves, right? Just a little bit.
Yeah,
Just a little bit.
But let's dive in on how are you feeling?
I always feel like you should know who you're talking to, right? So Mark said all these experts around buildings, and I am not one. I am probably more of an expert in the finance community and how we use finances to help shape and fund and communities, et cetera. So that's where my expertise is, and so you'll forgive me. But having said that, I am optimistic about our future. And that's not naive optimism. I know there is a ton of work to be done. And we were just talking ahead of this that there are many challenges that we face in order to future-proof our environment. However, I'm optimistic that we will be able to make progress, and there's just no point in being pessimistic about it. Like, who gets it done if you have a level of pessimism? So, optimistic.
Victoria?
Well, good morning, everybody. Really great to see you all. My name is Victoria. I'm the Chief Data Officer for a company that provides greenhouse gas emissions inventories to cities, counties, as well as the private sector all across the United States. And for my vibe check, I am going to go with creative. I think there is a lot of uncertainty when we look at where we've been going in decarbonizing our built environment and in decarbonizing our buildings. And there's a lot of uncertainty when we look forward, but I think that there are a lot of scalable solutions, and we can use the data from where we've been and what's worked to move forward in a creative way, and maybe find those new paths going forward with the uncertainty that we're feeling. And really looking forward to the conversation today, and so honored to be here with these experts.
Hi, everyone. Elena rhymes with Dana. Call me Elena Dana, but do not call me Alana. And so I was the former vice president of sustainability at Clayco, and a partner and I, we decided during this administration currently, it was time to start our own business and really forge ahead. So we have taken sustainability out of Clayco as an independent subsidiary, and we're forging ahead with sustainability for the built environment and corporate sustainability. For my vibe check, it's resilient. I believe that each of us within sustainability in that realm, we are resilient. And regardless of the administration, we will keep forging ahead and create the pathway for the future generations to come.
I'm James Dean. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Adrian Smith Gordon Gill. We do buildings. I do a lot of work in the sustainability space and in the resilience space. Previously, I was with the California AB 2800 Climate Safe Infrastructure Working Group, where we were looking at the entire state. What do we do to protect communications, power, water, transportation, the essential systems that it needs for a state and a people to continue to operate? And how is that change going to affect us? And I think out of that conversation, seeing all of you here, Aspen Institute, there's so many of these things going on. I'm cautiously optimistic is my vibe check. Awareness is there. Climate change is now in the mainstream of our conversation. 30 years ago, when I first was introduced to sustainability, there wasn't even LEED yet. And it was just the very earliest conversation, and people were asking, wait, what? What's gonna happen? Really? I don't believe you. And here we are today. In some respects, we're actually, we're beginning to live that. As a note for some of you today, call it our health and safety moment. We're in a heat dome right now, so it's going to be very hot. Also, strangely enough, it's going to be worse in the Midwest because of something called corn sweat, which I didn't even know what that was until yesterday. And apparently it's something to do with crops pollinating. But it was an interesting thing, mostly because it's this idea that, oh, hey, there are natural things that are going to happen in conjunction with the man-made things that we can't even begin to predict. But we're starting to understand them. And that's why I think cautiously optimistic. I think as a planet, we're all moving in the right direction. Will we get there? I don't know.
Yes.
So, optimistic, creative, resilient, cautiously optimistic, although, James, I feel like your vibe check should be corn sweat. I feel like that's...
I had to find a way to get that into the conversation today.
Yes, I appreciate it. And we'll use it frequently. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about risk. So before we kind of think about how we're going forward, part of this is to understand a little bit more around what risks are we really evaluating, what risks are seemingly demanding more of our attention. A lot of times we end up, James mentioned the heat dome, there is, whenever you have these extreme heat watches, it does kind of jump to the front of the line. Like, extreme heat is the most pernicious killer of all, right? So worse than all the other climate impacts that a lot of you might be tracking. And so being able to understand what risks we're managing for is helpful in understanding what solutions we might be going towards, or what tactics we might want to put together to do that. So I want to start talking just a little bit more about some of the risks you guys are seeing, what seems to be top of mind. Elena, I'm going to start with you. I think that it's important to kind of think, especially, I'm also curious about moving out of Clayco and making this kind of other entity is really like a strategy responding to needs. So I'm curious about what risks are top of mind, and then has that impacted the decision to actually create this new entity?
Yeah, a couple things come to mind when I think about risk. I think of equity risk, insurance risk, innovation risk, and policy risk. So these all tie together when you think about the climate risk and just physical climate risk within the built environment. We really need to shift towards a more equitable future. So making sure there's policy innovation within materials, and also what is the long-term goal of insurers and investors when it comes to climate risk? If they're going to continually be pulling out policies for a building that's in a flood level, tornado zone, et cetera, wouldn't they want to insure a building that was already future-proofed? And those are some of the risks that I think about constantly. And I do think that they have to happen in unison. And because if they're not, we're gonna leave something behind. Communities that are underrepresented will be left behind, or communities that don't even have climate policy. So all of that has to work together. And the strategic move, so the firm is called Alma Environmental Partners, we saw more of a lag and changes within words within our company that we didn't feel, so my partner and I, we didn't feel comfortable with anymore. And so we went to the owner and said, we'd like to create a sustainability consultancy where we can keep running without having our hands tied behind our back by legal. And he said, I want you to do it. I'm gonna back you guys up on this. So we took sustainability completely in-house. So we still represent Clayco and we still do all of their projects, but now we can move forward with our mission and really help Clayco as well, and other companies.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and something that's probably familiar to a lot of folks is that over the course of particularly the last 7 or 8 months, like there has been a lot of adjustments made on risks, either like actual or perceived, and it does put a lot of the tactics that we might have used to embed some of these resilient decision making, sustainability, like items that may not be solely like return on investment based, have come into question, and so a lot of folks are looking at how they respond to that because of this fear of retribution or saying the wrong thing or saying the wrong words. Yeah. And feel free for anyone to jump in on this. Whenever we're talking, feel free to jump in. I was going to ping to you, Kim, because I think in the realm of wealth management, risk is always like top of mind, right? But are there things that you're hearing in the kind of finance world that is identifying the fact that like things are changing or people are looking at risk differently?
Yeah, so I am going to pull on a thread that Elena mentioned too, just around the community side of it. But we're a global financial services provider. And as such, we have to, in a heavily regulated industry, right? And so as such, we have to be aware of and monitoring and mitigating risks that come with the business that we do. So one of the very tangible examples of ways that you might think about risks, specifically, climate risk for our business is properties, right? So you're thinking about all of the residential properties, all of the commercial properties that we might be financing through our clients. And of course, there's specific amounts of physical risks that are associated with that we have to assess. But you also have to think about our business operations. So the buildings in which we operate in around the world, there's obviously a certain amount of physical risk that we have to be mitigating for those building operations. Then there's our supply chain, right? And so all of the suppliers that we depend upon for services to supply our clients with what they need, we have to be concerned with the risks that are exposed to us and our business through those suppliers. And so it's a whole system view that we are starting to take around this, not just very narrowly focused on Northern Trust and a specific client segment. So that whole system view is important. And what mustn't be left out of that whole system view is the communities in which we operate, live, and work. And that's actually one of the best intersections for us in terms of how we think about solutions. So we have a $5.4 billion impact portfolio where we directly invest monies into communities. And there are several areas that we invest in, but a really large part of it, 68% of that portfolio, is around affordable housing for the communities in which we operate. And 68% of that, then if it's affordable housing, we're talking about buildings and we're talking about communities that may be underrepresented. And certainly we know when climate events or disasters happen, those who are most vulnerable feel it the worst and for the longest period of time. So we've brought into our underwriting processes around affordable housing, how do we make sure that we are building not great housing, affordable housing for today, but what will make this affordable housing into the future? So adding in those elements around resiliency, climate resiliency, energy resiliency. We actually are inking the deal on a solar deal that goes alongside some of the affordable housing. So it's a much broader, probably more complex and expansive view of this. Rather than just that, the credit side of it from, mortgages and insurability that we are thinking about.
That's really helpful. I have a follow-up question for Victoria. But before we do that, there's a thread that I've been kind of tracking lately, which is just like how important housing is and how dominant it is in a lot of the kind of public spheres as it relates to the built environment. I'm curious, of those of you in the audience, like raise your hand if your work touches on housing versus other types of buildings. Okay. Yeah, I think that it's also finding its way as being like one of the unifiers in how a lot of the future-proofing conversations are happening, as well as built environment. But I want to get a little bit more granular, Victoria. A data giant like Crosswalk really kind of provides a lot of like really key information that is responsive to the needs and of a lot of the clients. I'm curious, like, what are you hearing? Like, so your ability to provide, really kind of like granular emissions data has a lot to do with what's being requested.
Right.
So, and that is driven a lot by risk. So I just want to hear more about what you're seeing.
Right. Well, building on what Elena and Kim were saying, we want to provide data in ways that are useful. We want to turn that data into insights for our clients, and specifically around risk. As Elena, I believe, spoke to, folks want to be investing in future-proofed buildings. They want to be making sure that risk is reduced. And so what we have been working towards is making sure that we are using all the available characteristics in residential as well as commercial buildings to identify those buildings that are that could be targeted to retrofit or that could be targeted to further future-proof. And so we use information about the age of the buildings and about previous retrofits, and then we turn that into data visualizations that are helpful in terms of identifying where are these communities where there needs to be more investment and where are there opportunities that we can work with the community to really have that impact. We also not only identify emissions down to the building scale for those targeted interventions at the building level, but we also are able to aggregate data to the census block group or to the census tract, which is really important because that allows folks to overlay other demographic information so that we can look also at, are these communities that are underserved, are these communities that we also know have additional challenges, and how can we make sure that we're investing in those communities and future-proofing those buildings where we can have the maximum impact. And so those are some of the things that we really are focusing on to make sure that we're able to turn data and those numbers into insights.
And ones that are actionable for the folks that are seeking that.
Exactly.
So as we think about things that are actionable, part of the getting towards buildings that are future-proof and towards buildings that are designed better and more serving the users better, a lot of that has to do with an integrated design process. So one of the things we wanted to talk a lot about now is part of what does it take to break down some of those silos. A lot of you know that includes making sure that every one of the silos represented here are actually talking together, making sure that your design, construction, engineering teams are actually like overlapping in terms of the work they're doing. All of that doesn't happen by accident. right? So being able to have an integrated design process is something that we think is really critical. I'm gonna pan over here to James. Obviously, your firm is work all over the globe, but here in Chicago, things like the Chicago Architectural Center, and there's a lot of work that requires that level of engagement. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts on what works best in terms of that integrated design process, and maybe some things that are not working as well.
I'm going to step back just for a second to pick up, because this will tie into the last conversation around risk. And I think what I would say is avoiding a fear-based response to risk. We don't understand it, let's overreact to it. Let's not have an informed decision-making. I've done a lot of really robust risk analysis on projects we've looked at. Insurers, we've spoken with reinsurers, who are actually more interesting than just the insurers, because they're the people who insure State Farm. Those are the people you want to talk to. They write the check, and they ultimately set the rules. So we look at risk, and we want to break it down very granularly in terms of what are those threats, what are the opportunities in the buildings. Now, just as an integrated design process, I've done a number of projects where we'll do our energy modeling for our building. We're looking at the climate data that we have today. We're going to go ahead and grab an RCP 8.5. We've already built the model. Let's run the RCP 8.5 model. Let's look at what it's going to be in the year 2100. And then from that, we can establish what are the design decisions that we need to do. And let's make decisions. We're doing some critical facilities where we need to be able to effectively off-grid something in the neighborhood of, call it 3 million square meters, and still have it completely functional for up to 48 hours. With a well-integrated solar system with it and batteries and high efficiency in the buildings, we've actually created a model where this facility is essentially self-powering indefinitely. The climate that it's in.
Quick question while you're going there. Your climate data for the future, how comfortable are you with that information, and where do you get it from?
Lots of sources. In my work in California, we looked a lot at CMIP 7. For most architects and most projects, the simple thing, I point people, this will sound like, this is not an advertisement. Arup has a product called Weather Shift, and I use that a lot. I've had projects where I've had 6 climate scientists. At the end of the day, I find that the Weather Shift data is as good a prediction as they can provide to me. And so one of the things about the fear-based response is this idea that we need to dump a whole bunch of people in here to solve what we think is an unknowable problem. We can say in the future that more carbon, more heat, more moisture in the atmosphere, more storms. Well, what kind of storms? The analysis in California suggests, and we're seeing this now, we're going to get bigger storms with more intensity, but we're going to get less of them. So we're going to get a really wet winter, and then we're going to get a micro drought in the summer. We're going to get a ton of wildfires. It's going to rain again, and now all of that burned land, we're going to get landslides. So there's some basic. These things are the causal loops in all of this, so you can understand what these sort of steps are, but if you break down each one of those pieces, you can respond to it. And at the end of the day, for the building, analysis of a building, well, we needed a 4-inch gutter, now we need a 5-inch gutter. Well, it's a permanent thing, so I'll put in the bigger gutter now. We've done analysis for energy loads on buildings to ask the question, how much more energy are we going to need in the future? How much more renewable are we going to need in the future? And some of the analysis we've come back is, well, because PV panels as a tool are going to become more efficient and they're going to last longer, we've done the analysis of the building, and we look out at the year 2100, and we can say with some confidence that less PV panels will produce more than enough power to cover that building at a lower cost than today's present cost. And so now there's an economic, which gets back to the economic case. Can I show you across the 100-year service life of the building that operationally we can make a business case around a sustainability response? Because a lot of sustainability resilience fundamentally comes to this idea of shifting OpEx money into CapEx money. And that's a big challenge. And so a lot of our conversation then becomes around some of those, this integration conversation is not about just being stovepiped in how do I solve the building, but how do I look at those larger sets of responses that we can have in the design of the building, that we can address insurance, we can address finance, we can help our client make rational health and safety decisions for their employees.
I also feel like it's the intersection of a lot of these challenges where it's important and where there's opportunity for a lot of the engagement. You mentioned having critical facilities that need to operate for 24, 48, 72 hours. A lot of time medical facilities have that need. A lot of times those medical facilities are more in need in times of disaster. And so you have these overlaying issues where we might have an extreme heat event that's happening outside that is going to exacerbate chronic illness across the board. That is going to put more pressure on our critical use facilities, which means that it's going to need investment. Those facilities are also going to need to have thoughtful, ahead about like where not only they're sourcing their power, but how they're keeping that power on. We have a lot of issues that relate to flooding that we've seen, not just in the Midwest and Maryland and Texas. A lot of the challenges come from, are your mechanical, electrical equipment like raised above the flood line, and have you readjusted your flood line? All of those are about future proofing to give yourself options. And I think part of what we're talking about here is like, what is the optionality that we're baking in so that if we get those solar panels that are all of a sudden much more efficient, we can swap them out in a way that we already thought through and kind of created the conduit and the different ways to plug and play for that. Other thoughts on that? I don't want to. I feel like there was some energy.
Yeah, just really quickly, just to piggyback off of it, it's that integrative process has key stakeholders, and when some of them are left out, then your design it just inherently fails. So I always like to look at either the framework, the building and energy policy, et cetera, that the building needs, and figure out what are those key stakeholders. I'll give you an example. For an environmental framework like LEED, you want to bring together your AEC community and owner. But when you look at the well building standard from the very beginning, you're looking at internal operational people that need to be at the table, legal, HR, et cetera. So making sure you have the right stakeholders at the beginning, and then early analysis, as James said, is absolutely critical. I can't stand when people say, I just need the 100% CD model. No, thank you. It didn't help me. I need it in schematic. I need a black box, and we need to even do a water analysis as well. Something that I'm just going to also touch on really quickly, embodied carbon, embodied water. Those are also things that need to be done at the very beginning.
Perfect jump over into context. Victoria, I was going to actually talk to you a little bit more about embodied carbon and anyone else who wants to jump in. But I think the context matters as well, right? So we've talked a little bit about some of the risks we're adjusting for. We talked a little bit about some of the ways in which we think about integrated planning solutions to do this. But a lot of that also has to do with what is the context and what are the almost where it's third party or other actors that are making it easier and making it more difficult for us to do that work. So I think that one of the things that often comes into this conversation is policy, and how policy is either like assisting in some of those decision making or not. I'm curious from the perspective of like, again, who you're engaging with, what are the policy constraints or kind of really exciting things that have been moving some of the needle on the work that you're doing? And this is open for everybody, but I thought Victoria would have a thought as well.
So I think the stakeholder point is extremely important. We always, when we're working with policymakers, first recognize that the policymakers in their community, they know their community best, and so they will know the constraints. Simple example, but working with one municipality and looking at their inventory, they had a pool that was using a lot of natural gas to heat that pool, and that was actually one of their municipal buildings within their power that was within their power to make changes that was a big source of emissions and was holding them back from achieving their decarbonization of their municipal buildings. So a simple solution that they would know about and that they could put a cover over the pool, reduce that loss of heat. So I think that really there are some simple solutions, and then once we provide data to our municipal folks that are working on these policy solutions, sometimes it's a lot more complicated. Sometimes there is a land use decision that was baked in that unfortunately will take a lot of policy interventions to ensure that this community does become more walkable and is able to reduce their emissions. And those policy leaders in their community, they will know what those different interventions are. So we provide the data, and we often, we love maps. We provide data in ways that people can see where are these sources, what are these activities of emissions and of carbon and of pollution, and how can they, through their tools in their toolbox, reduce those emissions. So really, I think stakeholders is the most important piece here, and each community is different.
I mean, I also think being able to think about speed to be able to deploy is also important. I've talked with some folks about Ezra Klein's Abundance book and how they did kind of unpack a little bit of the issue around our inability to do things quickly, even if we know what we're doing. Are there either like assisting policy interventions or other tools that you guys have been experiencing that are making things happen a little faster?
Yeah, I think it's a part of bringing the stakeholders together early, right? So so excited that Aspen Ideas is here in Chicago. We have a mayor, we have a governor, of course, of Illinois, who are all in on climate and trying to make sure that we protect, our communities and that we future-proof our buildings. And so the speed with which we can get things done when we're partnering with community organizations, with construction designers, et cetera, bringing the government, government can either help or it can hinder. But in this case, we know we have administrations locally that want to see us advance. One of the projects that we did, I've only been in this role as the head of sustainability, inclusion, and social impact for like the last 3.5 years. And early on, I wanted to see, touch, feel like some of the projects that the bank was doing in terms of advancing energy resiliency, climate resiliency in the community. And one of the early projects that I was introduced to is on East Garfield Park, where they did a building development. So the mayor basically kind of moved all of the red tape out of the way so that this development could break ground and, according to the community-based organizations and the people there, like, really excited not only about the affordable housing that was going up, but the jobs that were going to be created, right? So you think about people, all of the needs, satisfying all the needs that the people will have as a result of future-proofing, but it was because the mayor and his administration was involved early, and whatever the roadblocks were, they were able to remove them so that we could break ground and get that project going.
That reminds me, like one of the neighborhoods here in Chicago, Brownsville, that is undergoing a lot of revitalization, investment. Historically black neighborhood, deep civic roots, a lot of work around microgrids, like 7.5 megawatt microgrid. And I'm curious about kind of building off what you said around how we do this work, this like great kind of generational work of building the buildings that will last into 50 to 100 years into the future. How do we do that and make sure that we are incorporating and bringing everyone along in that process? So the question and this is open to anyone, is what are your thoughts around how we are driving multiple goals with some of these projects, not just sustainability, energy goals, but also our kind of equity goals, our goals of like co-creation and co-ownership, and making sure that communities are having outsized benefits on behalf of these projects?
I'll jump in and opine on that one. A couple things around policy is, and you mentioned this early on, is there is this tendency to react by over-regulating. We think we need to solve the entire problem. I'm really excited about the sort of citizen developer model. And an example I mentioned the other day to a group of people was in Pakistan, horrible energy. It's been that way since the country was founded. People got tired of not having lights, can't turn their fan on. So people just started buying PV panels and putting them up on their roof, sometimes one, sometimes two, sometimes 10. And they just did it. No government responsibility, no reaction, no regulatory response around it. People did it, and today Pakistan is roughly 30% solar, and that is a citizen action. And there's a real power in that. We oftentimes think that we need a top-down response to this, but oftentimes what we really need to do is to clear the decks and let people make decisions for themselves. A comment you made earlier, in talking about this idea of, what you mentioned was your love of the regulatory space and performance codes. I'm actually very interested in performance codes that are focused on the goal. And if our goal is carbon neutrality or net zero, let's say net zero, our goal is net zero, that's my requirement for your house, that's my requirement for your building. How you get there is entirely up to you. If you want to do Mies van der Rohe's all glass house with a single sheet of plate glass and a lot of PV panels, and you can make that work economically, do it. Where we are today is I have 30 hurdles that I have to go to before I can get to my sustainable response, before I can get to a resilience response, and finding a way to sort of change that model to get focused on what's the big goal, be clear about that. And that's where policy is important, because policy can then help you organize all of those things, the procedures, the codes, the things that the zoning, the things that come underneath that.
It's policy adjacent, but it's also zooming out from what you said. How do we bring everyone together for the future? And what I think about is resource constraints. Oftentimes we look at this net zero building or the space, but have we looked at where the grid is with their renewable power or even just their capacity? And also in that area, is it a water-stressed region? So at Clico, we do a lot of data centers on greenfield in the middle of nowhere. And what we've started to do is develop these set of tools for each project where there are microgrids on site, where we are looking at how can we reuse water in a way that we haven't thought about in other areas, because we take it for granted. And then I think with that, you inform what policy is needed. But we've got a major energy issue with our grid, with our infrastructure. It's not built for this net zero transition just yet. And luckily under the Biden administration, we made some advancements, but we need that constraint to inform the policy so that we can continue to move forward.
I would, many of you have probably heard of the Edelman Trust Barometer, maybe. But at any rate, what it says is that people trust the government less than they trust businesses or communities to solve some of these problems. And they're not really saying that they don't trust the government at all. They're saying they don't trust the government alone to solve these problems. So I just kind of want to double down on the fact that, like, we can solve some of these problems, and there's evidence that it can be done in certain areas and with certain stakeholders, but you really just can't leave anyone out. You know, even the person who seems less knowledgeable, they might have a fear-based response. And so the answer is awareness and education. If you have somebody or organizations that know more, then maybe theirs is the policy advocacy. Sometimes I think I have my Chief Sustainability Officer here today. She always says, "Why do you have to mention me?" Because she's really the brains behind most of what we do. But it's kind of like, we'll have people come to the financial services organization and say, "Hey, why aren't you guys advocating for more of this or more of that?" Because we're not an advocacy organization. We're a financial services organization. But we support community efforts that know how to advocate and that advocate in their expertise to get certain things done, right? So I'm just doubling down on the fact that it really does take the public-private partnerships in order to move this forward. And the minute we think somebody or some organization or some entity should not be included, I think those are the opportunities to fail. And so, yeah, our view to this is really inclusive and expansive.
Victoria?
One of the things that I've found also accelerates the process is getting that early stakeholder engagement, but also agreeing on the problem, on the goal, and on the underlying data. Where are we now? So bringing that first phase of the data and understanding what are the current sources and what are the current activities that are producing emissions. That's also been very helpful as one of those early grounding steps for the future conversations.
It helps to kind of have a table setting where those people know where they're operating. We did a little bit of this, but I would love if there are particular project examples that any of you are engaged in right now that you're very excited about that kind of speak to any of the things we talked about today. I think the folks would love to hear about them. There's a lot of uniqueness to the work that we do, which ultimately manifests itself in like actually space. And so, are there projects that are happening, just completed or on the horizon, that folks should keep an eye out for?
I can't talk about them.
I was just going to say,
yes.
we can't really.
Yes, we have a couple of really significant projects that I think when we're able to talk about them, I think that the work that we did, being able to get significant off-grid reliability out of facilities is important. Some of the planning work that we're doing at a regional scale and at a city scale, some of those projects are starting to bear fruit. We're taking a hard look at, we've got a city where they've got an endemic flooding problem. And we think there's steps that they've taken in that project. We're building on to that with additional development that's being proposed. We're architects, we're going to do development. But trying to be responsive to that set of conditions. And so we've, in this particular project, we came up with a strategy that said, if you change your mix design, we can reduce your energy consumption, we can reduce your water consumption. If we can reduce your water consumption, we can reduce a wastewater problem that you have and help you potentially avoid, I forget what it was, like a $1.3 billion sewer fix. That's an amazing thing. And so, that's where I think, these responses to climate and the economics of the building and the needs of the city can bring all of those things together. And I think that's really exciting, is that's now a conversation we regularly have.
I have one that we're allowed to speak about. So it's called SciQuantum. It's a quantum computing campus in South Chicago. It's an old steel mill site that we're redeveloping into co-location data centers, a cryogenics lab, and then a lab admin building. We'll have many tenants, or the developer will have many tenants, I don't own it. And what we're doing is a master site development with the city of Chicago for energy, water, waste, carbon governance, and health and wellness, so that each building has to encompass these characteristics in order to move forward. But what it's also doing is reinvigorating that portion of Chicago. We actually had several people from that area that grew up there. They came in to speak at our office, and they were talking about how their parents used to have jobs, but they don't have jobs. And this will also help with employment and just bringing in, it's a food desert. So now we're gonna build, grocery stores and have shopping. So we're really hoping to future-proof that area. I have one other project, it's confidential, but it is so amazing, this particular client, what we're doing a net zero embodied carbon analysis. So we're going beyond concrete and steel, looking at MEP, insulation, gypsum, you name it, and we're figuring out what could we do to reduce everything. And they're also, on the job site, we're doing a lot of really cool things like HVO diesel in our generators. We're using drone technology to have a sustainability checklist on every job site. So it looks for if recycling's off, if there's a water leak, and then informs us in real time. But we're really innovating on this project, and I think it's gonna be extremely cool, but I can't say any more about it.
Love the secrecy.
We have a partnership where we are helping cities across the country identify areas where there aren't EV charging infrastructure. Oftentimes there are large areas within cities where there's just not convenient charging, and that really limits folks that would like to get an electric vehicle. And so we are working to identify that for cities across the country to help provide information about where is this walkability and where also are these charging deserts. One other thing that I'm really excited about is that we are including land use data. We're working with a partner to include land use, and a lot of cities are doing really amazing things with urban forestry and with planting trees and with these natural solutions. And that's something also that those communities can really enjoy, and it's a tangible decarbonization that these cities are able to do. And so we're providing that data, which can help, I think, also, if I go back to my vibe check, with the creativity. This is something that individual people can participate in and can be a win and can be a way for the community to engage in decarbonization across the country. So I'm really excited about that one as well.
That's fantastic. I think, to your point, I do think that the city has a role to play, right? Like, part of being able to initiate that creativity has a lot to do with creating some guide rails, and where are we trying to get to? Like, is that happening through a larger overall kind of climate action plan? Are they utilizing different challenge mechanisms in different places in order to do that, or are they just, again, kind of, James, to your point, like putting a metric in place? This is what we need to get to. Knock yourself out. Like, but we are going to get there, and maybe we are able to focus that attention on the grid cleaning, and that's going to make it easier for you. But maybe there's going to need to be some ambition that comes from different communities that are utilizing their assets to make that happen for themselves. Great talk. I'd love to be able to make sure we incorporate some questions from the audience. I think it'd be a good time now to kind of dip over and see if there are folks that have particular questions for anyone or specifics. Over here.
Thanks for the panel. I almost wanted to flip the last question into the reverse, where I think you guys and certainly the rest of the room, we're all kind of limited by our clients' budgets and priorities. How often are you guys pushing sustainability initiatives and then leaving ideas on the cutting room floor because the customer is kind of not receptive to your messaging and your strategy?
All the time.
Yeah.
Simply, it is all the time. And we have incredible ambition. I have an amazing team. And if they could be left alone to do everything they wanted, it would be incredible. But yeah, there is an economic reality. So you have to you've got to make a set of choices, in terms, and this gets back to the whole idea of the business case. And it gets to the idea of the CapEx and the OpEx model, and giving them, buildings are a tool. In my world, I'm focused on buildings. Buildings are a tool. Think about a building as a printer or as a car or a piece of machinery that a company buys. It serves a purpose to them. And when you start to look at it that way, it changes how you see the business model. Likewise, when you take that same building and you think about it in the context of a city, not as a building, but just as another piece of infrastructure in a city that's there to serve the people, it changes how you think about it. And so sometimes it's just about reframing the conversation. It doesn't always work. Some of our clients are highly motivated, some not, and that's okay. But you do the best you can do with that.
I love that you asked that question too, because I think, the foundation of a thought like that is sometimes what discourages people from just getting started, because there's so many things that we can do. There are so many I'm optimistic because look at what this panel just talked about in terms of activities, things that are happening. But there's so much going on. We didn't get to this place where we are today overnight. We can't solve it all overnight. We can't do it all overnight. So the idea that we would leave some things on the cutting room floor and maybe come back and pick some of them up later, I think it's just a small mindset shift to say that should be expected in order to get to what's next.
I go back to what we said earlier. The stakeholders at the beginning, early analysis. And when you're able to do that and bring the right people together, you often see that it's just ingrained into the design and construction. I always say it should never be called sustainable design, should never be called sustainable construction. It's just the design and construction. It's just what we're supposed to be doing as responsible people. So I think the earlier, the better. And then the key person too is that sustainability consultant, that thread that really holds it together and keeps it front of mind. If that person is not always at the table, or if someone's doing a dual role, you can see the difference at the end of a project. So I definitely advocate for that.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Nina, and I have a question about risk and regulation and inequity. So, I think we talked, there was mentioned earlier that, low income Black and brown neighborhoods often suffer the most, but have the least amount of resources. And when you think about land, the value of land, the market undervalues Black and brown neighborhoods while the county assessors overvalue, right? And so people can't, even if they have the American dream of owning a home, they can't pull equity out of it to make some of these climate improvements. So from your purview, how does government and private market work together in order to actually confront that? I worked in government for 10 years between the city of Los Angeles and the city of Chicago. So this was all when I would give a grantee $250,000 to do their building. They'd be like, Wells Fargo still won't return my phone call because I'm still too much risk, right? And so how do we combat that? Because that is a systemic inequity that can be hard to overcome. And then the point about regulation, I did raise my eyebrow because usually people don't do things unless they're forced to, unless the market is forced to. That's why our communities are vulnerable right now. So where does regulation come in with that as well? So just generally thinking about that partnership.
And I don't think I have the answer. I think there are some answers to that. So, for example, we partner with the Chicago Urban League. We partner with a number of other, foundations foundations and not-for-profit organizations that have construction development, affordable housing as a part of their core mission. And it really has played out exactly how I just mentioned it. Who knows, Chicago Urban League is great at policy advocacy and who to connect with in order to remove a barrier. They bring together financial providers, but also finances that can help, address some of those barriers. Some of these other foundations and organizations give the education and tooling around how to access the capital. We're funding all of those places and also have a seat at the table in order to help facilitate those conversations. So it's not easy, but it is simple in terms of making sure that everybody that needs to be at the table is at the table. Chicago Community Trust, I could just go on and name a ton of them. But it happens just like that. We know there's gonna be systemic barriers around facilities. We know there's going to be systemic barriers around accessing capital. We know there's going to be systemic barriers around maintenance and, jobs and all of those things, right? So we go into those deals or to those opportunities to future-proof, looking at who needs to be a part of it now to ensure that that end goal is actually achieved. I agree with you to a point around, regulation. Regulation can be helpful in that if it's pushing us to get something done and move everybody forward, it's great. If it's stopping us from getting things done, then we'd rather do without the regulation, right? So I think there's both sides of that, but again, it's working with those who know how to advocate for policy decisions, for regulatory decisions that really will move us forward. There's probably others.
Just one quick addition. So in design and construction, oftentimes, especially in major areas, you have a percentage of minority-owned business that you have to hire on the project to pay, depending on the construction cost or the amount. And so at CLICO, what we did was we realized there's certain areas where that percentage, we couldn't find that many people to fill that spot. And so what we do is we do a call to the surrounding regions to say if there's any small business, minority-owned businesses that need any kind of literacy within financial investments, need some help with cash flow, we provide that information to them, and we call the Go to Grow program. But we realized they're so underrepresented, especially as a business, that they don't even have the tools in order to work on a project of our scale. So we realized we have to close that gap ourselves as a private company and really help to inform those areas of, this is an issue within your area. So that's one area that I know from a private-public partnership perspective, personally, that we're trying to help out, and we see that more and more and more.
And just one little add on that, you know, policy does not have to be a blunt instrument, right? It can be an elegant tool when used correctly. And so being able to think about the fact that having people like yourself and having people that are engaged and supported as public servants allows them to ask the right questions and future-proof the policy to be able to make sure that there are a lot of considerations put in place so that the private sector actors that are fast-moving can be supported, and also having the public infrastructure to help bridge some of the gaps that and you can see coming. So it's the same methodology, but applied to the policy as we apply it to the buildings. I think we have one last question, and then we'll.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, I'm Kevin. And two really closely related questions, both to Elena, I guess. Is there an industry standard that's emerging that we could be testing against as we start exploring in the sector of ecological and sustainable building? Is there a systems analysis that we could start comparing projects against projects and go starting with a baseline and grow with the project? And then just really closely related, you asked what the source of climate data was, and I didn't catch what your source was. So if you could just follow up with those two ideas real quick, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm going to need this panel's help on that first one. But I think for us, there are so many frameworks. What I generally try to do, I hope no one from the OSGBC is in this room, but I generally tell a client, just earmuffs. Well, what I generally try to do is, because there are so many frameworks and clients have their own particular goals, what I usually suggest is create your own framework and use that as the model for each of your projects. Now, oftentimes we still follow the LEED framework because it's a great structure, but we want to add different things to it, and then they follow that. So what I always tell a client is, let's standardize for you, and then start benchmarking against not only your peers, but your buildings prior to. Anyone else?
Oh, just to answer your question, CMIP 7, CMIP 7, that's a downscaling source. So they take global weather data, and you can use that set of tools to downscale. Lots of states, California is doing a ton of work around creating regional models that are getting more and more accurate in terms of the analysis. Weather shift, that's just an easy go-to. In the architectural engineering side of this, when we're analyzing a building, typically we need an energy file that we're going to use to model against. That's the lingua franca that we're working with. And so that's the source we typically go to. It's, I can't remember, they like $500. It's buy one, you just load it into your software. You've already set up a model, you just run another model, see what your differences are.
I want to give the panel one kind of like last opportunity to speak, and basically similar to how we started this conversation with just kind of a single word. We're going to be in a place where we have these conversations long into the future, right? So 10 years from now at, Aspen Climate 2035, what's the one thing that you're going to spend your time on right now to make some of those conversations vastly different than the ones we're having now? I feel like we're in a space where we do need to be really strategic about the things we're focusing on. So what's top of mind for you going forward so that we can be in a better place 10 years from now? Small question.
Big question.
I can
One word?
start.
Yeah.
One word, sorry. I would just say we will continue to evolve. I think the mindset of evolve and then get to what's next. I know there's a lot of science and a lot of planning to truly future-proof but you have to keep moving. And I think there's so much in our way right now that might stop the movement or the momentum, and that's what I worry about. But if I'm not worrying, I'm really just focused on continuing to evolve.
I'll take a stab at the one word, collaboration. I've really been inspired by this conversation and about the role that data can have in that table setting for those early stakeholder conversations. We do have an open data product, and that can be used for advocacy and for journalists and for folks that are looking to develop policy or to the construction industry. And so bringing together that private sector, public partnership, and that collaboration, I think, is how we future-proof going forward.
What's the product called?
It's an open data product with the Data Foundation available.
I'll say innovation. I think truly we're going to have to come up with more creative and innovative measures in order to move this forward, especially even just by 2035. But 2050 is also around the corner, and a lot of us have some climate pledges and even commitments that we need to meet. So we're also going to have to be innovative, because at some point, there are things beyond the control of your own company, your own building, and we need to make sure that all of those pieces in Scope 3 are meeting what we need in order for decarbonization.
I'm going to say believe. Believe in the human capacity to solve this problem. You look at the evolution of Homo sapiens and where we started to where we are. Just look at the last 100 years. In the United States, we've evolved from an agrarian society to an industrial manufacturing society to a service-based society. We're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing. All of us are working hard, all of you are working hard to come up with the little things that we do. And this is an incremental process. There's not one big idea that's magically gonna save us. It's gonna be thousands of little ideas, and some are gonna work, some aren't gonna work. Some are gonna work in a moment, some will take time. But I believe that we can solve the problem. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm not saying it's gonna be cheap, or it's going to be fast, but I believe we can do it.
Absolutely. I always say we don't need, hundreds of thousands of people doing things perfectly. We need millions and billions of people doing things imperfectly. So just, follow things that spark joy and make sure that all of you are getting the rest and hydration necessary for this work. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you to the panel and to the Aspen Institute. Appreciate the time.